Tabletop time! I'm Murray.
And I'm Jen.
We are painting the People's Night. We asked you last time what colours we should use for the heraldry, and you responded with purple, green, and white. So that is what we're going with. Sit back, relax, and enjoy all the little nods, touches, and little details that we're going to lavish upon this night. Let's go!
Now, dear viewers, please forgive my huskiness as I am sick as I'm recording this video, but nothing will get in the way of delivering your tabletop time goodness. So the first thing we needed to do was to spray this beast down, and to do that, I grabbed some Vallejo primer and ran it through the airbrush. This allowed us to get full coverage on all of the small pieces easily without resorting to aerosol, which would miss parts. So of course our colors had been chosen by our YouTube commenters, and I had a few ideas as to how we could get them down. I wanted to test these out. After a few attempts, I was pretty happy with the effects we were ending up with, and we'll run through the exact techniques we chose as we paint each section of the night. Just to finish off, we did want to test off what some of this would look like on flatter, larger areas, and also the different masking techniques we could use to do our heraldry. We just grabbed one of these big resin gates and used it as a bit of a testing palette. So we had promised to do a mural, but upon looking at the night and all the panels that we had available, we all decided that we should do one each. The mural we went with was the top voted comment, and the suggestion for that was actually Celestine, but Jen would be tackling Celestine, as of course the Sisters of Battle are a passion for her, which left me free reign to paint really whatever I wanted. And what I wanted was to do an homage to the origins of Imperial Knights. I love the idea of painting this to look like an oil painting or a big mural that would be painted on a church. So a lot of my painting techniques as I work through this skyline all relate to stippling rather than brush strokes. I'm trying to emulate the look of a lot of tiny brush strokes that at this scale are too small to be seen by the naked eye. So what this would look like is actually just a kind of mottled surface texture representing thick oil paints and lots of small brush strokes. The image I'm trying to create here is a sunset or sunrise, rising upon a planet where the Imperial Knights venerate their history, herding dinosaurs. Yeah, that's right. If you haven't watched part 1 of this video, make sure to check it out as I go through the lore of how Imperial Knights all began as dinosaur ranchers. I think it's an absolutely hilarious and fantastic piece of old 40k lore, and one I want to make sure people remember. So this was a really special and new process for me. I'd never tried to paint anything like this in my life, and basically attempting oil paints and these Bob Rossian blends of colors was super fun, and I really encourage anyone to try it at home. I basically blended out a whole bunch of oranges, but also mixed in yellows and a little bit of blue into my mix. To help capture the vibe of a sunrise, I needed to add some clouds. So I put in some horizontal strips of cloud, again stippling really gently with this grey. This would create the heavy, thick shaded area. And then using the brightest of my colors, I did a really bright trim across the top of the clouds, a little bit of a silver lining on these clouds to really make them look 3D. With that done, I used again the same stippling technique to bring in a faraway horizon line of trees. And I built this up, getting closer and closer and larger, making sure that larger trees actually went above the horizon line rather than trying to bring them forward. This would help to create a perspective in the image. I wanted to paint some beautiful megasaurs, using browns to create my stippled in long neck dinosaurs. Once more, using the same stippling techniques and colors that were close approximations to the colors we would be painting that night, I just set about using the obvious framing parts of the night, such as the trim, to block out its shape and perspective. I used mixes of oranges with the purples and the original colors to slowly build out some blends, and I just went back and forth with shades and highlights until the night felt like it was part of the scene. For some detail, I used black paint to paint a large knight's lance. I felt that this should be a knight lancer as it really fit with the feeling of the heraldry. Also, their long stride and shock lance seemed like the appropriate go to keep wayward herded dinosaurs in check. Finishing out all the areas of the model with some sharp, reflective highlights, I have to say I was pretty happy with how this had come along. And with those finishing touches done, it was time for the final step to really help make this feel like an oil painting, and that was to put a satin varnish all over the top of it. By making sure the surface of this varnish was really messy with the brush tip and getting rid of all brush strokes and smooth areas, this would ultimately give a nice satin finish that helped to exaggerate that oil painting mottled look that I'd tried to achieve earlier.
So it was time to paint my mural, and I was super excited that Celestine got picked as one of the options, and I knew straight away that she was something I wanted to try painting. To give myself an easier time, I started off by sketching out the design I wanted to put on. I found an image on Google that I wanted to try and recreate. It was dark and moody, and I thought it would suit perfectly for this shield. I also wanted to give myself an easier time by allowing the darker colours to kind of give a hint of a silhouette. Once I was happy with my sketch, I went in with some white paint to start picking out some of the highlights. Having just done a video on painting Saint Celestine herself, I was pretty confident in the colours I was using to paint this mural. I used pretty much the same thing I used on the model, but making sure that contrast was nice and strong. In particular, that meant using different kinds of browns for the non-metallic metal and that beautiful scarlet red that the Sisters of the Bloody Rose are known for. When painting this piece, I definitely wanted to emphasise Celestine's wings. They are an integral part of her sculpt after all. So I took my time placing each feather individually, but also trying to make it cohesive to the piece. This meant going back and forth and making sure the contrast was also strong enough so that the wings looked visible but were dark enough. And then I lit Celestine on fire. Well, not literally. I just wanted to incorporate some flames around the sides of the mural. One of the famous scenes that Celestine's model is based on is the Fall of Cadia, which she is covered in flames, so I definitely wanted to add some awesome flames in there. I went back and forth with a couple of warm colours, again just trying to put in the little dark spaces to really make them stand out. Now, I was finding mine was missing some of the sepia tones that you would see in an oil painting, so I decided to go over the top with a sepia wash just to bring some of those highlights back down and give it more of a warmer tone. And for some final touches to the piece, I added some reflectiveness to the metal and also included a chain on the side. Overall, I'm super happy with how this turned out, and I actually kind of like the moodiness it creates.
When it came to my turn to make a mural, I decided that I wanted to sketch out the composition beforehand using a piece of paper. I honestly wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to make in my mural. I tried a couple of different sketches, including the design of Horus kneeling in front of the Emperor. However, Horus is kind of the ultimate bad guy in that that era, so maybe having him on the side of a knight is not a great thing for Imperial morale. After being a little bit indecisive and unsure on what I was going to do, I had a great idea. Hey, we have 2 chapters here in our own studio. We have the Space Bears and the Shields of Avalon. So perhaps this knight was present at their first meeting, their first exchange, and I'm going to capture this moment in my mural. It's going to be a Space Bear gesturing to our Shields of Avalon friend who is perhaps showing off a sword. I don't know what else Space Marines are going to exchange pleasantries over. So with that rough sketch done, it was time to start blocking in some colors into my panel. I decided that I would set this on the amazing verdant planet that is home to the Shields of Avalon, as I think that will make a really nice and novel background. I start sketching in the characters using my base tones before filling out those areas. Then I'll go in for the next pass using highlight colors to define the edges and get the lighting established. It's feeling a bit dark at this point, so I decided to fill in the sky to add a bit more color and help establish the tones that I was going to be moving forward with. Contrast was going to be crucial to establish the sort of non-metallic metal style that I was going to be painting the armor with, and particularly blacklining all the parts and individual gauntlets and fingers you can see on the Space Bear. They're very minute and fiddly. They also make a world of difference, so getting it right was very important to me. Now to start doing a gradient on the sky to really separate the characters from the background. I'm going to use some really nice vibrant blues, moving towards a more icy feel towards the skyline. Then I'm going to stipple in some clouds, and then I'm thinking maybe even a little Thunderhawk gunship jetting off into the atmosphere. The home planet of the Shields of Avalon is this amazingly verdant and lush rolling landscape of hills and amazing flowers. So I had to capture this here, and I sketched in some nice hills, and then I dabbed in lots of colors, blues, yellows, reds, and greens, to get the sensation of an impressionistic field of flowers. With the background done, I could start to work more on the color balance and highlights of the Space Marines themselves. I needed to bring them further out of the background. It's about here when I start blocking in the nose and the brows as well as the eyes that it's going to start entering the ugly phase, I feel. But I'm going to start pushing this around, going back and forth over it, refining it like clay until I'm happy with the results. And there we've made it. I celebrate with doing some very sharp popping highlights on the armor, and the faces I'm really happy with at this point. Let me know what you think about my attempt.
With the really cool hand-painted panels done, it was time to get into the bulk of it. Now, it's super important with knight builds and will save you a lot of time if you actually keep all the armor panels off and you paint them separately. On all of the panels, I started with a gray. I actually went for a very lightly tinted blue gray. This was Somber Gray by Vallejo. I airbrushed this in, covering almost all of the surface area, but making sure to leave the very, very extreme edges without paint in them. I didn't go over with multiple coats, as I was really happy with how one coat of this looked on the armor panel. The slight mottled effect gives the effect of lots of different textural variations over these large flat surfaces. Once the somber gray is sprayed everywhere, I grab a brighter gray. This was actually a glacier blue, and then I sprayed a smaller area in the upper parts of each panel, allowing the airbrush to naturally blend out and gradient into the darker gray underneath. And as a final touch, I got some flat white and just did some highlights on the extreme uppermost areas. Now, this panel effect was painted on every single armored panel on the knight, no matter what color they would end up. And there was good reason for that. For us to get to that reason, it would involve masking. Now, this is going to allow us to do all our heraldic stripes, but the heraldic checker pattern was the one I was most concerned by. To get some really good checkered patterns on a knight this big, what I did is I used our cutting mat centimeter grid and the knife, as well as the slightly transparent property of this masking tape, to just cut out 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter squares. Having lots of perfect squares of masking tape would make a grid super easy to put together. So on various areas on the knight that we wanted to be green, I set about creating a grid using these mask squares, just masking off that white to preserve it for later. In the areas that would be green, I got the Warp Lightning contrast paint and airbrushed that all over. The natural gradients of the airbrush look really good on these large flat panels, and by sticking to contrast paints over the top, it allows us to keep those really consistent highlights through our color variations. Plus, it has the added benefit of pulling off masking tape, which is extremely satisfying as you reveal those finished results. For all the areas that would be purple, we decided to go with Magos purple contrast paint and we'll be applying this in exactly the same way. But for various areas on the knight, we wanted to do some more masking to maintain the white. This has led to a household pattern, which is diagonal stripes across purple, and the individual knight who pilots it, his pattern, which is the green checkers. The one other thing we wanted to add is that this is of course the seneschal of the knightly house, as it is such an epic knight. So there'll be a mask straight up the center of the top to denote that rank. But that's enough talking. Why don't you just enjoy a montage of us doing the satisfying steps. So the next step we needed to do was to do all of the trim on the knight, and this was definitely a team effort. You'll notice the fingers in these shots changing rapidly, and that's because Murray, Jen, and I all took our part painting all different parts of this knight. It really was a group project, and it was actually super satisfying to paint a model in this way. But to do this, we grabbed paints from the Scale 75 metallic range. Black metal was the base coat, and we painted all the trim in that first. So we grabbed a mid-tone silver and we mixed a blend of that with the original black metal, creating gradients, attempting a rough true metallic metal scheme. Basically the same tenets and principles as non-metallic metal, but painted with metallic paints to save a bunch of time. I think this is a really effective technique and one that's worth trying at home for those battlefield armies where you don't have time to do non-metallic metal award-winning paint jobs. Once this was done, we moved on, continuing the gradient and pushing the highlight, mixing that with the mid-tone and then all the way up to speed metal, another Scale 75 paint. The mix of the brightest highlight with the mid-tone was used to line highlight all of the sides of the trim and also spot highlight all the rivets, and we also used it to make little scratches and reflections across each of the metal trim sections. Now with the trim going on and Murray and Jen finishing that off, I grabbed the guns and painted out some areas in brass. I highlighted these with gold, but basically was just doing this to pick out some areas of detail on the undersuit of the knight. Now on the undersuit in particular, the guns, we still had some areas masked off. These had been sprayed purple, but Murray had painstakingly masked them all because we were planning on doing some more painting effects using the airbrush on the undersuit of the knight. But before we could do these, we needed to pick out the last few areas, and that meant using charcoal grey on all of the black cables on the gun sections of the knight, as well as the flexible cables and leg joints on the lower half of the body. Now it was time to streak and grime this. But we didn't use streak and grime. We actually used a rust effects from AK Interactive, crusted rust deposits. Maybe it's a different metal alloy, but more likely this is rust and accumulated oil grime from years of marching around the deserts of Mars or, well, another world. After the streaking grime was applied, I came in with a woolly dauber, got some alcohol or white spirits and worked off the top of that, allowing it to settle in the recesses and really selling this technique. Actually looks like it's marched around the deserts of Australia, which is kind of perfect for a tabletop time night.
So now it's time to add our higher tier patrons onto our knight, and we had these back panels where they would fit perfectly. After a bit of discussion, Dave and I decided that we wanted this to look like scrolls or pieces of a book. Before putting everyone's Patreon names onto this panel, we had another panel we needed to paint up as well. So I started by writing out some scripture that I found online and gave a good try at doing some calligraphy. I was pretty happy with how this turned out and even added a little homage to the Space Bears. So to make my job a little bit easier and to put everyone's name on this particular part, I decided to pop everyone's name into a font generator. This would allow me to see how it looked like in a script format and to be able to copy it nicely. Once I was happy with how this was looking, I went back and gave a bit more detail into the background to make the names really stand out.
So we were definitely on to the home stretch, so Murray and I set about doing some chipping on the armor. Using a charcoal grey, we scratched, flicking upwards and away from directions that gunfire or bits of metal or shrapnel would hit the knight. We allowed these to be fairly random, but in certain areas we very deliberately used them to cover up parts of the resin. Despite the fact that we hot soapy water bathed and scrubbed this model, there were areas that still had a weird residue on them that just would not take to paint very kindly. And in a few of these areas when we were masking, we lost great swathes of paint. So those areas got rather hefty chips paint over the top of them just to hide the grey resin that was peeking through from underneath. This panel in particular was one that suffered from a lot of that paint not adhering. You can see some of the chips and scratches are a little bit bigger than we might otherwise have liked. But overall, I think the effect works really well and sells the effect of some light battle damage on this suit. With the model coming together and almost finished, we could get to the satisfying parts, such as removing the masking from the feet of the knight that had been painted purple. We also got to move in and paint some spot details, such as the lenses, which needed to be painted up in a nice brass color, as well as areas on the upper carapace, such as the vents and exhausts. I went in and used an airbrush with contrast paints to create heat bloom across the lasers. The last thing left to do was to paint the name of our knight and the pilot, our club kings of the mini club, Time Blink, Nexor, and Kiranon. So as we mentioned previously, that means the noble lord of our house is Kiranon Nexorus, piloting the Tempus Conivio. And the last thing we needed to do, of course, was to glue it all together. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as the Tempus Conivio strides to war.
So a big thank you to our Patreons. We could not do this project without you guys, and what an amazing project it has been. A big thank you to our newest Patreon, Andrew Campbell, for joining the Mini Club crew team. If you'd be interested in joining our Patreon, all of the links are down below in the description, and we would love to have you. We have an awesome community on the Discord as well for you guys to join in with and get nerdy.
Yes! This thing is ridiculous. It's huge.
It is. It is absolutely massive, and I'm so proud of the work that all of us put into this. It looks so good.
Rip Dave, he's still sick, but he's here in spirit, encased within this, I don't even know how to say this thing. I'm not even gonna try. Just imagine that I got it wrong. You'll correct me. This is so cool! Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this video. If you enjoyed our little foray into a bit of a community build, please hit that like and subscribe button, as that helps the community itself. Thank you so much to our patrons.
And a big thanks to Dave, who's still sick, but thanks, buddy. All right, now, oh gee.
Oh,
all right,
careful.
Now we'll
no.
I think we're done with,
Yeah.
So I'll just stop recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, so who's taking this?
I thought
Because I want it.